Howdy, Taylor Marshall here, and today we're going to talk about the 7 deadly sins. We're going to talk about how you can memorize them easily. We're going to talk about how Thomas Aquinas describes the daughters of the 7 deadly sins. That's right, the daughters of the 7 deadly sins. And then we're also going to talk about how you can practically apply what you learned today to your daily examination of conscience and maybe spiritual direction as well. So first we're going to go through the 7 deadly sins, and then the way you can remember them easily is by an acronym, and it's called PALEGAS. PALEGAS. So you can kind of think of something bad or disgusting. PALEGAS. P-A-L-E-G-A-S. PALEGAS. Pride, anger, lust, envy, gluttony, avarice, and sloth. Okay, so that's it. PALEGAS. That's the way you can remember it. You just always remember PALEGAS, and you can run through them. So like when I'm about to go to confession and I'm waiting in line, I think to myself, PALEGAS, and then I say, how have I been prideful in the last week? When have I been angry in the last week? When have I had lustful thoughts or actions in the last week? Envy, gluttony, avarice, and then sloth. All right, and sloth is one of the tricky ones. People ask about that. Sloth is the aversion of doing things in general, but in the spiritual life, the aversion of seeking the spiritual disciplines, prayer, maybe Bible study, attendance at church, etc. So that would be sloth. Okay, so let's go through the daughters of the 7 deadly sins. So you might be thinking, well, what are you talking about, Taylor? The daughters? Well, Thomas Aquinas describes the daughters. These are sort of the subsets under each of the 7 deadly sins. So, for example, pride has these daughters, or these sub-sins related to pride. So, disobedience, boastfulness, hypocrisy, contention, obstinacy, discord, and love of novelties. This would be like being eccentric, and this probably comes out in most people. Love of novelties would be something like, too much concern about fashions, or maybe overly concerned about the latest technologies and devices. So if those daughters show up in your life, then you have a tendency towards pride. So again, the daughters are boastfulness, disobedience, hypocrisy, contention, obstinacy, discord, and love of novelties. And I'm going to put all the footnotes and notes where you can find and read this in the Summa Theologiae of Thomas Aquinas down below this video in the notes. So don't feel like you have to take notes right now. You can just listen, and everything you need will be right below, and I'll link it so you can go right into the Summa and read it for yourself. Okay, so that's pride. So we're moving through here. PALEGAS, pride. Now we're going to go to anger. And the daughters of anger are indignation, swelling of the mind, what Thomas calls clamor. This is really just shouting and yelling at people. Blasphemy, name-calling, and quarrels. So those are the subsets or the sub-sins under anger. Next, we go P-A-L. L is lust. And the daughters of lust, or the sub-sins of lust, are blindness of mind, thoughtlessness, inconstancy, rashness, self-love, hatred of God, love of this world, and contempt for the future world, for the world to come, heaven. Right? So those are the daughters of lust. We move on to E. This brings us to envy. And the daughters of envy are hatred, tale-bearing, detraction, joy at our neighbor's misfortune. So if something bad happens to a friend or a neighbor, or they lose their job, and you're like, haha, serves them right, that would be an example of a subset or a daughter of envy. It's coming out in a different way, but it's still under envy. And then also grief of others' prosperity. So let's say a friend of yours gets a new job, they're doing really well, something good happens, and you resent that. Well, that shows a form of envy, grief at another's prosperity. Okay, so we've gone through P-A-L-E. Now we get to gluttony. And the daughters of gluttony are unseemly joy, vulgarity, believe it or not, uncleanness, loquaciousness, that's a big fancy word for talking way too much, and dullness of mind as it regards understanding. Once I was, back when I was an Episcopal priest, I was driving home and there's a big traffic jam. I pulled over and there was a little honky-tonk bar there, and it had swinging doors. And I pushed the doors open and I went in, and there was a big biker gang in there. And right when I walked into the bar, one of the guys said, "Oh, JC," and he said our Lord's name in vain. And then they all turned and they saw me standing there. And back then, when I was an Episcopal priest, I wore a collar and the black. And they all looked at me and they all kind of got puffed up. And I thought, uh-oh, this does not look good. So I just went all the way to the other end of the bar and I ordered a beer. Something was sitting there. And then they wanted to start talking to me. We got in this big conversation. And they wanted to know whether drunkenness, getting drunk, was one of the 7 deadly sins. And if you look at the list of pale gas, you don't see drunkenness on there. But as I explained to them, drunkenness would fall under gluttony. Gluttony is an excess of food or pleasure. And in a sense, alcohol is a kind of food. It's a desire for a pleasure. So although it's not listed in the 7 deadly sins, it is one of these subsets under gluttony. And Thomas Aquinas treats drunkenness in that section under gluttony. Okay, so we've gone through 5 so far on pale gas: pride, anger, lust, envy, gluttony, and now we move into avarice. Now you maybe hear that word and think, avarice, what is that? Avarice is an obsession with money or covetousness, coveting what other people have. All right, so that's the 6 of the 7 deadly sins. And the daughters of avarice, or obsession for money and goods, are treachery, fraud, falsehood, perjury, restlessness, violence, and an insensibility for mercy. I think that last one's interesting because, sometimes you hear there'll be people begging for money or people collecting for a good charity, and you'll hear someone, it's kind of like Ebenezer Scrooge, and they'll say, well, why do they need that money? They should go out and get a job or something like that. That sort of insensibility to mercy, what Thomas Aquinas calls insensibility to mercy, is actually a sign of avarice. And of course, in the movie The Christmas Carol, you see as Ebenezer Scrooge begins to change, you see that his avarice starts to give away, and then he begins to become more merciful by the end of the book or the movie, whichever one you're enjoying. And then last of all, we get to S, pale gas. S stands for sloth, or some people say sloth. I say sloth, I'm from Texas. Sloth has its daughters, which are malice, spite, faint-heartedness, despair, sluggishness with regard to the 10 Commandments. All right, you're not responsive to wanting to live according to the 10 Commandments. Wandering of the mind after unlawful things. So those are the daughters of sloth. All right, again, malice, spite, faint-heartedness, despair, sluggishness in regard to the 10 Commandments, wandering of mind after unlawful thing. Okay, so I think from this day forward, for the rest of your life, you're never going to forget the 7 deadly sins. You may forget the daughters. I don't even have all those memorized. But the 7 deadly sins, pride, anger, lust, envy, gluttony, avarice, and sloth, all you have to do is remember pale gas. P-A-L-E-G-A-S. Now, one final application. How does this relate to your life? Well, what I do personally, you don't have to do this, but this is what I do. When I lay down at night, I'm in my bed, and I've kissed my wife good night, and all the kids are put down, I pray and I ask God to show me where I have failed in my life during that day. And the easy way to do that, because you're tired, it's been a long day, it's hard to think about the day, I just run through the pale gas. So I say, Lord, when was I prideful today? When was I angry? Did I shout? Did I get mad at the kids? Did I get mad in the car on my commute? And you go all the way through them. Gluttony. Did I eat too much food today? Was I intemperate? Sloth. Did I avoid my prayers? Did I not fulfill my rule of life? Etc. And that's a good way every single night to run through your life real quick. It takes maybe 20, 30 seconds. It's not a huge, opening my heart experience. I wish it were, but I'm often tired and a lot going on. But it's a great way for me just to run through that list and to make an examination and then say, Lord, I'm sorry. Make an act of contrition. And then the next day I know what I'm struggling with. And then when I go to confession, I know kind of the patterns and the contours of where I'm struggling in my life because I'm daily going through this list, PALEGAS, of the 7 deadly sins. And then when I go into confession, I can immediately run through them. I actually begin with, I was prideful this many times, here's what I did. I was angry with my wife once, and I got yelled at the kids 4 times. And I go through all of the 7 in order. I actually go through the PALEGAS order. I don't tell the priest that. But I go through that, and it's a great way to organize a confession and kind of touch and hit all the bases along the way. So I hope that's helpful. Always remember for the rest of your life, PALEGAS, that's the 7 deadly sins. And below this video, you'll find everywhere where Thomas Aquinas talks about these 7 deadly sins and their daughters if you want to learn more. Again, thanks for watching, and God bless.